I really feel like we're making some headway here. Unfortunately, we need to end this by 7 because we have a board meeting and a public hearing, and everybody knows we have bad weather. The purpose of this meeting is to have a question and answer with county officials about abandonment, what it means, and how it's going to affect moving forward with the rail line. This is not a moment for advocacy, and it's not a moment for people to step forward and state what they want to happen out there. Those moments will happen in board meetings. You're welcome to come to the town board and advocate for what you'd like to see our board move forward with. The other and the best place for you to come forward with advocacy like that is at the county DPW meeting. At this point in time, the next DPW meeting is not scheduled yet. So I'm gonna pass around this pad. If you want to be notified when the next town board meeting is and when the next DPW meeting is, put your name first, last, and the best way to reach you, whether it's by phone or email. And I will be sure to let you know when those things get scheduled. All right, so starting off, let me make some introductions. We have from Warren County, Matt Simpson. He's the chairperson right now of the DPW committee. And that's the committee that the decisions that relating to the railroad go through. We have Mike Wild, he's a supervisor at large from Queensbury. Craig Leggett is from Chestertown. And we're waiting for the county administrator to show up. His name's Ryan Moore. We're going to end at 7 on the dot.
Good evening.
So I apologize if somebody feels like they have questions that you weren't able to express in the hour that we've got. I'm going to have you write them down and submit them to me, and we will answer them and get back to you. For anyone interested in expressing your opinion, like I said, come to the DPW, come to the town board, introductions. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt and ask you to speak to the process that we've gone through so far. Are you prepared to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
And then hopefully Ryan comes in, he's got more.
I know.
He's the administrator, but at a 50,000 foot level, we started out with this process. My main goal was that everybody was going to be heard, that there wasn't going to be a predetermined direction of this railroad. This is a huge asset in Warren County, and we know that there's 4 activities on the railroad that aren't rail related. There's people that are for rail, and we also have our neighbors to the north who have a business plan that would require the use of the railroad. And so primarily we have a railroad that is designed for movement of freight. And we've gone through a process to, in the absence of SNCR and that whole, I'm sure you're all familiar with what happened with Warren County in that situation. I don't know if anybody is able to turn about that. But so moving forward, we needed a rail operator. We needed somebody who wants to move freight and to support this business plan that would, the plan is to benefit everybody, whether it's in Essex County, Hamilton County, Warren County, and ultimately down through Saratoga County. So we issued RFPs, requests for proposals, for rail operators, lease or purchase of that line. And I'll speak just for me personally. I think that it's better served if it was owned by someone other than a public entity, just because then it's very difficult with 20 members of a board of supervisors deciding what their interest is in this portal. So we really explored a lease agreement or a purchase. We had several people that expressed interest. We had one that was very, it was exciting. We were all thrilled when Omnitrax made a proposal. And it was a really good, well thought out proposal, long term, and unfortunately that didn't come to fruition. And Ryan, I don't know if you Ryan, want to take over, or if I can continue, or if you want me to. So I stopped at Omnitrax coming in, and ultimately left. I started from the beginning when we tried to find a leaser.
Sure. No, I was sorry I was behind a truck on 28 and then we got behind the plow, so it was well timed. So we put out the RFP, as Matt said. That was issued on March 4th. It was due April 18th. We had 3 proposals back. RailNet was a straight out purchase proposal. They were out within 7 days. They couldn't come up with a $50,000 deposit that we required in order to negotiate with an entity that wanted to purchase. Kind of like, it's an earnest deposit, like when you buy a home. Omnitrax stayed in the game until May 23rd. And the reason they got out was because they, as many people here I'm sure know, Omnitrax was working with DEC on the Tahawas line to try to get an agreement with DEC on how to move forward with freight. They were working with Paul Mitchell and his operation. They were also working with Revolution Rail and had come to an agreement to allow Revolution Rail to continue doing what they do, where Omnitrax would basically run the freight trains at night to accommodate that schedule during the summer months when Revolution did its operation. And they had been talking with us for months. I was talking with Josh Putterman was the name of the fellow who was working with them. Steve Potter, I don't know if Steve's here tonight, but was working with that group as well. We talked to them for a couple of months before we put the RFP out, knowing that they and a couple other entities were out there and interested in doing business on the line. Eventually, it ended up being a problem with the leadership at Omnitrax. The company was in the process of being passed down from the older generation to the children. It was always what Josh described was a high risk, high reward proposition, and essentially the management of the company decided, rather than invest our $15 million here, where we may not get a return, we'll put it over here where a return is more likely. And that's really why they pulled out. It wasn't a lack of progress on all of the fronts. They did a tremendous amount of work trying to make this line work out so that they could haul freight on it. That left one proposer left. It was United Rail out of Las Vegas. And the county negotiated with them, I believe, through October. Was it October that United Rail pulled out? We had a couple of Andrea and Supervisor Wild, Mike from Queensbury were part of that negotiation, and there were two other supervisors. We thought that was moving in a good direction. Where we essentially got hung up, and I can get into the details of what we were negotiating with United Rail if you'd like, but where we got hung up was the county wanted to be able, because of our experience with Iowa Pacific, where we had an operation that was in a multi-year contract with us, and we noticed was starting not to put the investment into the rail line, or essentially draining the equity out of the rail line. Hard for them to come up with the money to do that, and we understand the position that they were in. We didn't want to be in that position again. We wanted to be able to terminate if for whatever reason the service wasn't working out. We said to United Rail, you're the rail experts much more than we are. Why don't you come up with some performance metrics and come up with what the acceptable standards would be in each of these metrics, where if you get outside of that standard, we have a correction process, and if you can't correct it, then that gives the county grounds to terminate. We were all the way up to that. We were starting to flesh that out, and United Rail pulled out. It was my understanding that they were still going to work with Corinth, with the town of Corinth, to run freight out of the IP site south to Saratoga Springs, and that they were also interested in passenger rail. It's my understanding, I don't know if it was late last week or early this week, that broke down. I did talk to the supervisor in Corinth for confirmation on that, and he did confirm that United Rail has walked away from Corinth, and he wasn't privy to any explanation as to why they did that, but that's where things are at right now. We have a resolution, and I have the draft resolution if anybody's interested in reviewing it, or I can even read it. but we have a resolution on for the Friday board meeting authorizing me to commence an abandonment procedure with the Surface Transportation Board. It doesn't mean we're gonna jump right into it. We have a lot of legal research to do. We need to know where we're gonna land before we jump, if you will. But what abandonment allows us to do is built into the abandonment process. And abandonment doesn't mean we're gonna turn our back and walk away from the asset. It doesn't mean that we're, physically abandoning the asset. It doesn't mean we're gonna pull up rail tracks. Abandonment is a process that you go through with the Surface Transportation Board. That's the federal entity whose mandate it is to preserve freight where freight is economically viable. And as part of that mandate, the abandonment process includes something that's called an offer for financial assistance, an OFA. That process will play out as a result of the county initiating an abandonment proceeding, where if there is a viable freight operation out there that has a proposal that can, has all of the entities together, the customer in this case, it would be the Paul Mitchell and his mine, the hauler. They've been working with a successor, if you will, to Omnitrax called RJ Corman, major player in the rail industry. But it'll be on them to put together a proposal to get in front of the STB. And we will work with them to make sure that our process allows them to do that, so they know. So when we start, it'll initiate a clock that'll start ticking, and there'll be steps that have to be followed by anybody that wants to participate in this. And it would be our goal to make sure that freight, if there is an opportunity for freight to happen, that freight has a shot. If we get through that OFA process and there is no viable freight, and the STB is gonna make that decision, Warren County is not gonna make that decision. That's why the STB is there, that's why the OFA and the abandonment process are there. If that decision is made, then the abandonment process allows us to look at alternative uses of the rail. And by alternative uses, I don't mean just hiking, I mean rail biking, because a freight operation that's very active, it's gonna get tough for them to allow Revolution Rail to continue doing what they're doing, which is very important to this community. Recreational uses mean snowmobiles. If you have an active freight line, they're very unlikely to allow snowmobiles to use the line, because snowmobiles have a way of ripping up the infrastructure and voiding their investment. Bikes, hikers, those are all the things that we would want to deal with when we say recreation. If for some reason the freight didn't work out and recreational uses didn't work out and nobody was interested in the line at all, very unlikely that we would rip up any tracks. You hear it discussed that there's a scrap value in the steel, and there is, but whatever we would get if we sold all of that steel is not gonna put a dent in the remediation of the ties, because the ties have asbestos in them. It's certainly not a project that I would be eager to commit the county to financially. And there are ways, if we had recreational uses, where we could make it run right alongside those tracks without having to disturb the tracks. Another thing about abandonment that you should know is if abandonment is approved, all that applies to is the freight designation. So the Surface Transportation Board's jurisdiction over the freight purpose of the line is removed, and there wouldn't be freight in the future. Still an opportunity to run passenger trains and to keep the infrastructure in existence to do rail biking and whatever else. So I guess that's kind of my synopsis of where we've been and where we're going.
All right, with that, anybody else wanna weigh in? Mike, do you wanna talk about any of the negotiation process?
I could. When the county was looking at trying to sell or lease this, our concern was making sure we had a viable operation, and it's because of what happened to the Saratoga North Creek plant. They left us with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of uncompleted maintenance, and we didn't want to get ourselves in that situation again. So as we went through the process, we asked them for some significant metrics. How can we make sure that you guys are going to be successful? And if you don't meet those metrics, do we either cancel the contract, or do we find some way to adjust where we're going? So it wasn't as though we were making it extremely difficult on them. We just wanted to have an understanding that they were gonna be successful before we turned this line over to them. And it was important for the county to maintain control, of the asset instead of just selling it away and not having any control in terms of how it was developed or what would happen along those lines. So, as Ryan mentioned, there was movement along the lines. I wasn't really satisfied with it because most of the times I saw metrics, they were just scratched on a piece of paper or a napkin. And my experience in big business raised a lot of big red flags about that. You know, these guys are gonna be running a multi-million-dollar operation. I would expect them to be able to come up with some serious metrics about maintenance and the revenue and what they expected and how many staff they were gonna need and like. We never really got what I consider to be a viable information from them. So it kind of raised the red flags that I mentioned before, and it didn't take long as we pushed harder to try to get those metrics for this entity to finally decide that they couldn't move forward with this. So I think one of the things I want to add is Supervisor Hogan was very adamant to try to do whatever we could to make this operation successful, make a rail line successful. And I believe that as the committee, negotiating committee, that's really what we tried to do. We tried to make sure it was a viable operation, instead of someone who might come and just rip the rails up, which is historically some people have done before, and just taking the money and run. So we didn't want to get into that situation, and I think we did our best to try to find someone who could successfully operate the line. It just didn't happen this time.
Matt, Craig, either one of you have anything to add before we open the floor to questions?
I would just say that, add to it also, we had the issue of the storage of cars, you know, and, that is something that, under the STB, it's part of rail operations. And we heard a lot when we had the, storage of cars. That wasn't good for anybody. It didn't benefit our communities, and we really didn't realize the, benefit of this rail line. And that was another key, point that we were trying to protect from not ever having to go through that situation again. So and that was a difficult, that is a difficult metric to include in negotiations with any freight or rail operation. Because at times that's one of their most viable sources of revenue to support that infrastructure, and the cost to support that infrastructure is very, very significant.
It's $500,000 a year just for our line.
Just for maintenance.
Just to maintain. And not, it doesn't count the maintenance of the bridge infrastructures that we have to maintain. There's a bridge, there was a multi-million-dollar repair staring us in the face that needed to be done. So it's not an easy road for a rail line to come in and try to make all that happen with limited freight or no freight.
Did you have anything to add?
This is a significant infrastructure. It goes the whole length of Warren County. It's the Hudson River, it's the first wilderness corridor, all the way up through. So whatever gets done, it needs to be done wisely, and it's not something we really want to make a misstep on of selling it, giving it away, turning it over, whatever. So the input and the deliberation over time is what's going to be key on this one. Thank Andrea for calling us all together here, and appreciate everybody coming out on such a beautiful night as well.
Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, and just to recap, Ryan, Surface Transportation Board deals with abandonment, and that's on the freight
That's right.
side of things. So passenger line, though, would be separate and apart.
That is separate and apart. You could have an abandoned line where we still maintain the line, take care of the line, and run passenger rail.
Thank you.
I'm gonna open the floor up to questions. It'll be one person at a time. I'll call on you. We'll try to get to everybody. Nancy, you were waving first.
I just want to make sure I understand, so abandonment means there never would be freight on that line again.
That's right. That's what's being abandoned. It's not the actual physical infrastructure. The Surface Transportation Board would be abandoning their jurisdiction over freight traffic.
Can that ever be, oh, one at a time, Martina. John, you guys can fight it out if you want.
I wanna ask the county supervisors, have you guys done a serious, study on the economics of turning it into a recreation trail? And what kind of benefits that might have for the towns along the way? Or is it just, it might work, has anybody really studied that?
So there has been, in-house study of, what it would cost to, build a trail, under a certain scenario. But there hasn't been a comprehensive study that would show the economic benefit and, you know, the, benefits to the community outside of, building the infrastructure. I don't believe since I've been there, we've talked about it, but I think through this process, we've been so focused on trying to get a handle on this railroad that is, we're really not in control of. It's been controlled by other conversations about, you know, freight movement, but we're actually the only owner, you know, Warren County, the Warren County residents are actually owners of a rail line and are responsible for the cost of maintenance of that railroad and the infrastructure costs. So we haven't gotten to that point yet, but I think that, you know, it's another step that we need to.
If I can,
It also may be unique, from other, trails. I mean, Cape Cod, for instance, has a great rail trail, but it's a lot more picturesque on ours. You know, pardon. So it may not be apples to apples with other trails.
if I may, Andrea, one of the things that the county is looking at is, the state has numerous grant opportunities. And we are looking to see if we can get some help to do a full-blown economic study of what it would mean, for us to be able to convert this into a trail.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important that that happen. And compare it to maybe historically what the tourist train has done. And, you know, and at least take both, you know, take that into consideration. So yeah, that needs to be done, I think.
Martina?
I was just curious if abandonment did happen for the freight portion of it, could that ever be reversed?
So, if you look at what they're doing on the Tahowas line, they being the state of New York, they're actually not seeking for that line to be abandoned. They're using an abandonment proceeding to get into a rail bank situation. The interim trail use agreement that they're trying to work out, would actually retain the STB jurisdiction, so that in the event freight needs ever did develop in the future, that you would be able to, the STB would reassert its jurisdiction and work with whoever owned the line at the time to see that freight would get in place. So that would be an option for us, and all the board is asking me to do right now is to, at the appropriate time, initiate the abandonment process. But if we get beyond the OFA stage, the direction that we go on recreation or whatever the use might be we would still bring that back to the board for debate. And if we wanted to go in that direction to have the STB jurisdiction preserved while we pursued a recreational use, we could do that.
Okay, thank you. Marco?
I just wanted to say real quick, so, you know, trying to get an apples to apples comparison to a recreation trail, I know would be difficult. Today I did actually make a phone call to the Lehigh Gorge State Park, which is in Pennsylvania, in Poconos.
Marco, is this a question?
Well, I was just gonna ask if it ties into the economic benefits,
Does it
and
go up at
I'll
the
leave
end?
it at that. They had 184,000 users on a 23-mile stretch of trail in Poconos. Similar train town, but 184,000 users was, I thought,
If you're asking
No
whether
question,
that's-
I'm sorry.
If you're asking whether that's comparable, the answer is I don't know, I'll look at it.
well, all right, here's the question I would ask. Here's my question. Has a apples to apples or close to apples recreational trail been identified?
No.
This one's not too far off.
Poconos, you said?
Yes.
Is my question potentially making you nervous? Which
No, as long as
Okay.
it's a question, Pete.
That's a good thing. I have 3 easy questions, if I can do that. They're
Okay.
solid questions. The first one is, what's the status of the line south of Warren County? Who owns it, and is that currently viable, and do we stand any risk of getting hung out to dry, by the line south of us?
South of us is owned by Corinth. They pick up south of the Hadley station, and they own 16 miles, I believe, all the way down to Saratoga Springs, and then Canadian Pacific picks up. What Corinth chooses to do with their line does have bearing on what happens to the north, to the extent that you're talking about freight. If Corinth entered into, and Justin's an expert on this, I'm glad Justin's here, but if Corinth were to enter into an agreement with United Rail, now a company like Corman that wants to haul out of the mine has a problem because they have to pay United Rail on the way to the Canadian Pacific interchange. So it really depends on what the use of our line is going to be, the answer to that question. If we were to do recreational trail, not so much. Corinth would be free to do what they need to do out of that IP site because they're only transporting freight south, and it wouldn't affect our line.
But they're planning on keeping their line intact, I guess was
That's my understanding, yeah. It's a priority for that town to try to get something going in that IP site.
Okay, and another quick one. When the abandonment, you mentioned that there is money available in that process. Does that mean public money for possible
No.
restoration of the tracks? Or
No, what would happen would be, let's say that Paul Mitchell and RJ Corman came forward and responded to an OFN and said, we really want to make a go of freight. What would happen is the Surface Transportation Board would act as a mediator between Warren County and those guys. And they would first and foremost see if there was an ability to sell the line to them. And the way that would work is the Surface Transportation Board would put together what that proposal ought to be, how much they would place a value on our line. And Corman and Mitchell could either run with it, or they could say no. If they run with it, Warren County doesn't have a choice, our line gets sold. The second piece would, if they didn't go an ownership route, would be a lease, where the Surface Transportation Board would work with the County of Warren to try to structure a lease that's financially viable for our taxpayers.
One more quick one. The status of Iowa Pacific and the Sanford Lake line, do we know what that is?
Yeah, they have an agreement with the state, which there's some language in there that says that it's an irrevocable agreement to support the state on making that into a trail.
They won't interfere.
Yeah.
Do they owe taxes? Is there a chance of foreclosure on that line? I guess
Yes, Essex County could foreclose on that line, but then you get into a legal issue that is really, the Essex County attorney has researched it. They know a lot more about it than I do, but they worry about the implications of that if the county forecloses. That's why they haven't done it.
Okay, thank you guys.
And also Hamilton County.
Oh, Hamilton, yeah, that's
Hamilton
right. There is a
County
little,
also.
there's a.
They don't own a section.
No,
No,
but Hamilton
but
County
they could,
goes through.
they could.
Just a sec, Bob, Ed had his hand up first.
How many miles of rail are we talking about here?
Yeah, 16 miles from the interchange in Saratoga Springs up to the Warren County line, and then another 40 that Warren County owns, and then I believe it's another 12 up to the mine.
This is what we
29.
own.
29 and a half.
So the
This is
29,
the amount
yeah.
of rail we own.
The Warren County only owns 40 miles,
And one thing.
Bob?
and a little in Saratoga.
Yeah,
16.
Yeah, okay, I'm Bob Nessel, and I'm wondering right now, I haven't heard that there's a major advantage to initiating the abandonment problem, or the abandonment process. And the other part of it is the government agency that's gonna deal with abandonment. How is the fact that this thing is 3 parts, we're in the middle, what's the probability that abandonment will be successful? And if it isn't, if there's no probability of that, what is the advantage of doing it right now? Is there any advantage to the county, to us, taxpayers?
Do you mean from a freight perspective, what's the probability that freight could emerge from an abandonment?
Well, that's always something possible in the future. Barton's might wanna start using it. but where's the advantage right now to get this thing going?
The reason to do the abandonment now is it opens up a route to any use of the corridor that you wanted to have. It opens up, freight.
Which is, that's not available now?
Pardon?
That's not available now?
It's not, because it has to be, by state law, the county cannot lease or sell real property unless it's part of a competitive process. That's why we did the RFP, and the RFP resulted in every response to it fell apart. To do another we could do another RFP, if there was political support on the board to do it. I don't know if there is or if there isn't, but it's another year, and it's another year of our taxpayers paying for that line with no end in sight. And if we end up a year from now where we are now, where any proposal has fallen apart, we're looking at the same decision, is to advance abandonment in order to get to the next step. The action that we're set to take on Friday is really about having the ability to determine what we're gonna do with this asset and not just have it in a holding pattern where we keep paying for it.
Well, we've had multiple uses for 15, 20 years. We've had Christmas, Christmas time Santa Claus on it. We've had ski trains. So you say we can't have multiple uses from now on for some reason or other?
Well, the government is not going to run tourist trains. That's never been the position. Our position has always been to have a private entity come and run it, and it's proven to be unprofitable. That's why there's nobody doing it right now.
Is there still is there a major advantage to Warren County right now to get into this process?
Absolutely, because it's the only way we get to an end.
And if I can expand on what Ryan said, part of the abandonment process is a notice to basically all the rail operators that this line is available. And if you have any option or wherewithal to try to run freight on this line, now's the time to get engaged. So we could go on for years and years, and maybe somebody will show up and, put us through the ringer again and not be able to follow through with it. But with the abandonment process, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but the federal government has an open book, so to say, so that any operator that feels they can possibly develop a proposal to profitably run freight over the line has the ability to come in front of that Surface Transportation Board and present their case. As Ryan said, once that case is made, if it's viable, the Surface Transportation Board will come to Warren County with us and we'll start negotiating. I would prefer to see that line operating like that. But the problem is, how long can we wait for it? Because there's significant dollars that every taxpayer has to put into this infrastructure to keep it viable.
Yeah, and viability is essentially the question, is something viable? It's viable if the market will allow it to be viable, if there's a profitable going concern there. Because if there's not, we don't feel that it's right to subsidize that with taxpayer dollars.
Greg?
I'm just wondering what the condition of the line is since the November 1st storm?
So we have at least 5 washouts, major washouts, about $500,000 to repair those. But even prior to the washouts, if to do a full survey of that line, you need a drone. We have pulled DPW crews off of clearing, felled trees and things to have them pave roads. So it would need some work. Now, we estimated that if we were going to commit the county to maintaining this asset at freight grade and to spread out the cost over a period of years, you're talking probably $500,000 a year in operating to do it without bonding. Omnitrax had a I wrote this down somewhere. It was a $15.1 million 5-year capital investment program that they felt it needed $15.1 million worth of work in a period of 5 years. That was to do what they call a 287 convert or 286 upgrade, which would bring it to industry standard for freight.
And you want to define that there's a difference between freight and passenger?
Yeah, there is. It's, if you ran passenger rail, you did not have to maintain it to freight standard. It would be cheaper to do that. Justin is more of an expert on this than I am.
The standards to which you have to maintain your track are dictated by the class of track in which you operate. So right now, the class of your line is class 2 track, so that meets a certain set of federal regulations. The class of track dictates the speed that you can operate. So just as an example, if you were to go to class 2 to class 1, that would drop you down to 10 miles an hour freight, 15 miles per hour passenger. The only step down from there is accepted track, but you can't operate passenger trains on accepted track.
Yeah. And what we found in talking to freight operators that were interested in this line is that if you want to have a freight operation that gives you a return on your investment, you have to upgrade that track, because if you're running cars out of the mine, I don't know if that's north, I'm assuming that's not. If you're running cars out of that mine, the more cars you can run, the quickly you can return your investment. The proposal we got from Omnitrax was not cash positive until 5 years in. There was gonna be a challenge.
Alan, and then,
Go ahead.
Has anybody in this whole mix contacted Canadian Pacific to find out what kind of rates they can get if you had an active rail shipping freight? From what I understand, I could be wrong, the problem that they had to buy with Pacific was it wasn't feasible to ship it down to Saratoga and then have Canadian Pacific hook it up and move it down to Albany.
Yeah.
So apparently, is there a probability or possibility of, if a person takes over the line, does shipping, to be able to take it to Saratoga, get on the main line and take it all the way to Albany themselves, without having to do all the shuffling the cars and waiting and the fees that Canadian Pacific's gonna charge?
You're right that was a major problem for Iowa Pacific, was the fees that they would have to pay with Canadian Pacific. I talked to Canadian Pacific once. It was when we were negotiating with United Rail, and they were confident that they could get a much better deal. And there was an issue of potentially using one of the, I don't know what you call it, one of the sidings, the side tracks.
Sure.
Something like that, where they wanted to run over that instead of run over the main track, so it'd be easier for Amtrak in Saratoga. I couldn't get Canadian Pacific to speak about it because their thought was, until something was real, they weren't going to invest their staff time and their lawyers and their financial people in it.
But don't you think it'd be a good idea to talk to them and try to get some kind of idea of what kind of freight they would use, so when you're negotiating with an operator, that you say, we've been working with Canadian Pacific, this is kind of the ballpark range they're gonna charge you for shipping. That kind of would make it maybe a little bit more feasible for a person to come in, or a company to come in and say, hey, these guys are serious, they're working with somebody, they're kind of opening the line for us to go to Albany, or wherever they have to go with the stone, or whatever they're gonna ship, instead of being stuck in Saratoga and having to be on the limbs of Canadian Pacific whenever they wanna pick it up and move it and bring the cars back.
Yeah. Omnitrax had, I believe, a potential customer in Boston. So they had conversations with Canadian Pacific, and I believe that they had gotten to a point where they thought that would be viable. It was a very small piece of what they were ultimately looking to do. And I would have to think that if Corman and Mitchell were going to do an OFA, that would be part of what they would need to ferret out, is what kind of rates they could get. I do know that there have been conversations about that. I don't know to what level of detail they've gotten. I was on a conference call that Corman was on a few months back, where they were talking about the puzzle here is the product that they would run out of Tahowas. It competes with a product that New York City is getting out of Connecticut. And the issue is how much you have to pay and how many people you have to pay down the line before Mitchell's profit margin is eliminated. And if you're going to maintain that profit margin, those rates are going to determine whether or not by the time it gets down there, if it's more or less competitive with the Connecticut product.
Ellen.
Just to clarify a point, you referred to the fact that the line is costing the county $500,000 a year. If you move forward with this, does that mean you would no longer be spending that money?
I don't think I said that it is currently costing us $500,000
Well, then I heard then I heard 300,000 to 500,000. So
if we were going to commit to owning the line and putting all the investment into it to maintain the infrastructure, the first proposal, for example, the proposal that we initially got from United Rail said that they'd be responsible for normal maintenance and that we would be responsible for building the asset. We were able to negotiate eventually a little bit away from that, but that was their gut reaction. if the county was to be in that position. It would be about $500,000 a year. But I can tell you, because I had somebody on my staff run the actual expenses over the years. In 2018, for instance, we spent $225,000 on the asset. So we haven't been up that high historically, but we would be if we made that commitment.
And what is that money used, I mean, what is that expense for on the line?
It's for herbicide, it's for taxes, we owe taxes to some entities along the line. It's for maintenance, for, you know, the washouts that we just had, that'll be $500,000 to fix those.
So a filing for abandonment wouldn't make that expense go away necessarily?
No.
Okay.
No, well, it would, it depends. It depends on whether or not, there's going to be freight, and if there is going to be freight, how much is a freight hauler
Well, if we go for abandonment, then there won't be freight.
No, that not necessarily. Abandonment could open that front up where the STB would negotiate, and that's precisely what they would negotiate in the OFA process. It's what is the county's financial stake in that maintenance, and what is the freight customer and the freight hauler's stake in that maintenance.
Chris?
FEMA, will they help with the washouts?
I hope so. We, the FEMA money that we'll get if we get it, and the governor's sent a letter into the president, we help with that process. We'll put up 25% and FEMA covers 75%. In a perfect world, we would get that 75 and insurance will cover our 25, so that's a work in progress.
Phil?
We already got schooled. Keep it down.
If it's a question, you're cool.
It was great to come here tonight and meet you guys. With my 40 years experience, Justin's a railroader, that isn't why I'm here. Meeting Mr. Simpson, thank you. Very cordial, because sometimes I think, and maybe I thought it, that the county, oh, what are they doing, whatever. This is a very positive in this 45 minutes, from my perspective. Your invitation, you open the door to those interested in what's going to happen, and I think that's very cordial and professional of you gentlemen up there and Andrea. And I think it settles in all the people's minds that Warren County isn't the bad guy with the black hat, and they aren't positive about the future of this railroad. Having said that, I'll watch my watch. If you talk freight, yes, I rode thousands of miles and ran a lot of war trains. So I've got my time and experience and rode the last passenger train in 1956 out here, for whatever that's worth. Everything has, I think it's Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose. I don't think the expiration is here yet, if ever it will be, for this branch, positively. You guys have had in a sense, a bad, not personally met, relationship with those, but if we back it up to the Saratoga North Creek Railroad, and my station family is here tonight from the depot. I'm very proud of them and what we've accomplished, and thank you for your cooperation from us to you guys, and continue to work with you down there for a positive outlook on that. I think the tributary feeds the river, so if freight is not right there flashing all the time, then what about revisiting, in my opinion, North Creek to say, and riding it as a D&H railroader in Brakeland for 40 years, conductor. I believe between North Creek and
Bill,
certainly Thurman.
Is there a question here?
Well, I just was
Is there a question here?
Is it going to be visited to say the positivity of what we had could have a future from the Upper Hudson and the Saratoga North Creek? Freight doesn't look like it's going to happen. So what's the entertaining thought of starting out small in North Creek, mom and pop, because you did the station at Thurman. So that shows positivity of a short line railroad out of here as we had with the Upper Hudson. It'd be something better than nothing.
Thank you. I don't know, I think he's asking what the county might be entertaining for potential uses. Is that correct?
Yeah, if I follow the question, it's are you foreclosing on the possibility of having a passenger rail? And I would say no. As long as something is economically viable and there's a private sector entity out there that's interested in doing it, we'd love to hear it. That's what we were trying to get out of the RFP. we wanted, not all supervisors on the board, certainly, but certainly I did, and I would say a majority of supervisors on our board really wanted freight and passenger to work out of this RFP. That was the purpose of putting it out there and trying to see who out there was interested and what they could put together. And we were sad that Omnitrax pulled out and that the United Rail negotiation didn't go better than it did. Because what we have is a rail corridor, and the best use of a rail corridor is rail. But we also live in the world of possibilities and impossibilities, and that's where we're at now.
Kelly, then Lori, then Bob.
My question is, simply to make sure that I have understood what you have said. What I understand is that the county is feeling the pressure with the money from owning this line. You'd rather not own it, you'd rather lease it or sell it. You can't find somebody who's going to run freight. So you wanna take it out of the state that it's in, I don't know what you call that, and what's the word?
Take it out from under the Surface Transportation Board.
Yeah, go to the Surface Transportation Board and get the, put into another category, another name for it. What's the name? Well, I can't even think of it right now. Abandonment. You want to abandon the thing, but that you're not leaving the line anywhere. It's just a change in what you can do with it.
Yeah,
and
the
you can still
jurisdiction.
run passenger train on it. And if you get somebody who's interested in running freight, you can go back to the Surface Board and they will start to negotiate the freight. They can bring that back. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Abandonment, the reason we're going down that path is it really leaves any use of the corridor open, and it'll help us work through that.
Lori?
Right.
So, my question is, if you apply to the Surface Transportation, then it becomes known at the federal level that there is a railroad that is open to, negotiation. Would you guys also simultaneously put an RFP out again?
No.
You would never put another RFP out?
It's more expedient to do it through the abandonment. It would be quicker and it would be.
You think you'd get the response that you want? So, and my second question is, we just had an election and we have new supervisors coming on board and new representatives. Why are you doing this at the end of this year instead of waiting a year? And I'm not saying punt it down the road, but why not wait until 2020 when your new representatives are sitting on the board, because this is what they were elected for?
I'll come up anytime. Just invite me, I'll be here.
No, I'm at the county level. You're gonna propose this on the 20th?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, why do it in December when you have new people coming on board, in January of 2020, and some of them may have been, elected based on positions having to do with the train or abandonment?
I don't know that there was anything strategic to that
Okay.
other than timing. The Public Works Committee voted to advance the resolution at the end of November, so that puts it on track for the December meeting.
And we will ask you to come up again. Better weather though.
Yes, thank you.
Better weather.
Ryan, you might be able to help her Matt, but my sense is we've been working on this for a year and a half. Pretty damn
been
close.
longer than that. It's been
part of
2
our
years.
regular discussions for some time in terms of what we're gonna do. And there were debates about whether we should go to an RFP or not, whether it was worth it. You know, I think the debates brought us to a good point that we're all comfortable with. That's why that resolution is in front of Ryan. Because I think we really did do our due diligence and really thought hard about what we had and the obligation we had to our taxpayers, as well as the obligation we had to a significant asset that was in the county.
And
So-
that's a really good point that Mike makes, and it's something that I forgot to mention. I mean, I came on in April, and this discussion was going on before I came on. And it took us until August to have the committee say, yes, we think it's worthwhile to do an RFP. And there were supervisors that I really respect who said, I'll never support a sale, but we still put that in the RFP just to see, well, what was out there. And so it did take a lot of discussion and debate to get to that point.
Has the governor, who has found the Adirondacks after a long life, been been brought into the picture, and does New York State have any interest in maintaining this marvelous piece of history and engineering right out of the Capital District into the heart of Adirondack Park?
This isn't an official position from the governor by any means, but talking with staff, on the staff level, with the Attorney General as well as DEC, I think it's fair to say that the state recognizes that this corridor is an asset. The state wants to keep the corridor together from Saratoga Springs all the way up to the mine. And the state would like everybody along it to work on what that future is going to be. But as to what they're looking to do on to Howes, it looks to me like they'd like to do a recreational trail. They have not, I think they wanna focus on that piece of the line. It's premature for them to meet with us on our 40 miles, but that's something that we wanna do when they're ready for it.
Sterling?
I wanted to first thank you all for coming and thank the audience. I was afraid when I got here that this was going to be some sort of a slugfest, and I really appreciate everybody trying to analyze this and think it out. The issues are really very complicated. I just have a couple of small questions. One, I feel kind of a fundamental discomfort that the middle municipality seems to arguably control the destiny of a community in another county. And I know that there's been some comments made that options remain open throughout, but from what I've learned, if we complete a successful abandonment and we get to the end of the abandonment, it's very, very unlikely that rail service will ever return to access the mines in Newcomb. So I think we have to be conscious of the tone that there may be some finality there, and there's an awkwardness in having this discussion in Warren County, I think. And I'm curious, do we have active negotiations, discussions with Newcomb officials, with Essex County officials? I think it's imperative that this room get bigger and bring the people from Essex County in so that they can be up to the same level that you've gotten us up to. And I'd be interested to know if there's agreement with getting them more involved, how involved they are already, and also if we are having discussions right now at some level, which I picked up from your comments, with Mitchell Stone and who's this potential successor, is it?
Corman.
Doesn't that weigh very heavily against the success of an abandonment proceeding? Isn't the fact that somebody's expressing interest, at least in discussing with you operations on that line, isn't that enough to keep it with what people in the industry, I think, call the surfboard for a few more years? Is it possible that this is premature?
We wouldn't be moving in this direction if it was contrary to Essex County's interests in terms of them being in the loop as to what we're doing and why. I think they're comfortable with it. I don't want to speak for them, but I think they're comfortable with it, and I think Mitchell and Foreman are also comfortable with it. I know that I've spoken on the phone with President McCormick and said, if there is to be freight on this line and you're going to run it out of the mine, this is the most expedient way to do it, rather than go through an RFP process again and put it in front of our board.
If we do get all the way to the end of a successful abandonment, do you agree that that pretty much eliminates the potentiality, maybe 100 to 1, of operating lines out of the mines again?
I don't agree. I think if we were, first of all, if we got through to the end of abandonment, it means there's been an OFA and the Surface Transportation Board told us we don't think that the freight is viable. Secondly, if we get to that point, we have the option to do a rail bank where we maintain the Surface Transportation Board's jurisdiction just in case.
Thank you, and sincerely, ending where I began, I think it's been a great discussion, I really do. From you guys, from Andrea, thank you, and the audience entirely.
2 more questions, Tom and then Mike.
I'm sort of reiterating, piggybacking on what Sterling said. You know, there's 4 counties involved here. 3 major counties, but the line passes through Hamilton County. We have a viable business that right now can't run with the washout north of North Creek. And it's been putting money into the economy. And I can speak for the farmers market and local businesses that Rev Rail has done in the last 3 seasons, quite a bit of business, and the residual business. So my question is, have you and are you willing to negotiate with the 3 counties? I say the 3 counties because I just don't know about Hamilton and what kind of skin they have in the game, but Essex, Warren, and Saratoga's got skin in the game. Well, that would be my question to you. Are you willing to, and do you want to negotiate something that works for all of us?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have all the respect in the world for Bill Farber, and Bill's in the loop on all of these discussions as well.
Thank you.
Mike?
My question is very similar to these last 2 questions. I live up in the exotic land of Minerva, which is to the north of here, and the line goes up through Minerva. But I just wanted to know if the county, if Warren County has been in talks or negotiations with Essex County, because I know Newcomb and Minerva definitely are interested in what happens here in Warren.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quick question, quick answer.
And Dick Lucia is my old friend too. I worked for Dick when I was the deputy administrator in Saratoga County. And he's a great guy. We talk once every couple of weeks on all of this.
So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.